Let's jump into another deep dive. Today we're getting into the world of business budgeting. We'll be looking at Dr. B's lectures from YouTube. Specifically, his video on master budgets and planning from fall 2024. Now, I've got to say, this Dr. B, he's a bit of a character, you know.
Oh, is that right?
He's got some pretty strong opinions, especially when it comes to what he calls cushions in budgets. Like, he's totally against them. He even had a little back and forth with a student, I think his name was Darius.
Oh, this is going to be good. The human side of budgeting, you know. It's where psychology meets spreadsheets, and it can get pretty interesting.
Exactly. So, Dr. B really emphasizes the importance of budgets. He calls them a roadmap, a permission slip to spend, and he really stresses how crucial they are in both our personal and business lives. He even brings in his own experience as a financial controller in the hotel industry. He had to bring together a whole team of managers to create a budget.
That's fascinating. It really highlights the collaborative side of budgeting, right? It's rarely a one-person show.
Yeah.
You've got all these different departments, each with their own needs and priorities,
Wow.
all vying for limited resources.
But what are some of the other core benefits of budgeting? Dr. B mentioned a whole bunch.
Oh, yeah, he did. He talked about planning, focus, control, teamwork, motivation, and benchmark setting. All really important.
And those are all kind of connected, right?
Absolutely. When you make a budget, you're forced to think ahead, prioritize your spending, and make tough choices about what really matters.
But what about those behavioral factors that Dr. B mentioned? He seemed pretty concerned about the potential for, like, unethical behavior when it comes to budgeting.
Yeah, and for good reason. When people feel pressured to hit those budget targets, they might be tempted to cut corners, even do things that are dishonest.
Right, the slippery slope.
Exactly. So having strong ethical guidelines, a culture of transparency and accountability, that's really important.
And that brings us back to those cushions.
You brought up continuous budgeting. He's a big fan of what's called a rolling budget, constantly revising, adjusting your budget, usually on a 12-month cycle.
So you're always looking ahead, anticipating those challenges and opportunities, and making adjustments.
Precisely. It makes a lot of sense in today's world. Things are always changing so fast.
Okay, I'm starting to see the appeal of that. But let's get into the actual nuts and bolts of creating a budget. Where do we even begin?
Well, Dr. B is very clear on this. It all starts with the sales budget.
Okay,
And that's where his hockey stick example comes in.
the Toronto Stick Slingers.
A perfect case study.
He starts by showing us their balance sheet.
Yeah.
That gives us a snapshot of their financial position.
Yeah, exactly.
So they've got some cash, accounts receivable, inventory of raw materials, and finished goods.
Always good to know where you're starting from.
Right. So then he gets into their fourth quarter sales budget. They're projecting to sell 3,200 hockey sticks at $60 each, which adds up to, what, $192,000 for the quarter?
That's a decent amount of revenue, but to create a budget, they need to break that down further.
Right, into monthly projections.
Exactly.
And it's not just dividing it equally across the 3 months.
Yeah.
They have to consider things like, seasonality.
Makes sense. Like, December's probably their busiest month.
Exactly. They're projecting 1,000 sticks in October, 800 in November, and then 1,400 in December.
Got to plan for that holiday rush. Everyone wants a new hockey stick for the holidays.
And once they have those monthly sales projections nailed down, they move on to the production budget.
This is where they figure out how many sticks they need to make each month, right?
To meet those sales projections and also maintain their desired inventory level.
They don't want to be caught short, but they also don't want to have a warehouse full of unsold sticks.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance.
Right. They need to find that sweet spot.
So they're using this formula, taking into account their desired ending inventory, their projected sales, and their beginning inventory.
So for October, they need to produce 710 hockey sticks.
710 sticks.
Now they can start figuring out the costs associated with actually making those sticks.
All right, let's break that down. First up, direct materials.
What goes into making the product, right?
Yeah, so in this case, it's mainly the wood for the sticks.
Each stick needs half a pound of wood, and they're paying $20 per pound.
So to make 710 sticks, they need to figure out how much wood they need to buy. What about direct labor?
That's the cost of the folks actually making the sticks, right?
On the production line, cutting the wood, shaping the sticks.
Exactly.
Dr. B says it takes a quarter of an hour to make one stick, and their labor cost is $12 per hour.
So for 710 sticks, that comes out to a direct labor cost of $2,130 for October.
Right, we've got materials, labor. Now, what about factory overhead? What even is that?
All those other costs of running the factory, things that aren't directly materials or labor.
Like rent, utilities, supervisor salaries.
Exactly.
So keeping the lights on, the machines running.
Those costs can be variable or fixed.
Variable meaning they change depending on how much they're producing.
Exactly. More sticks, higher variable costs.
Okay, so how do they calculate this factory overhead budget?
First, they figure out their variable overhead, which is their direct labor hours multiplied by their variable overhead rate per hour. In this case, that's $10. Then they add in their fixed overhead costs, which are $1,500 per month.
So for October, their total factory overhead budget is $3,275.
Precisely.
Now they can figure out their product cost per unit.
The total cost of making one hockey stick,
Right, it's got to be important.
very important. To get that number, they add up the direct materials cost per unit, the direct labor cost per unit, and the factory overhead cost per unit.
And for October, that comes out to $17.61 to make one hockey stick.
There you go.
And they use that number to make their cost of goods sold budget.
Right. That budget basically projects how much it'll cost them to make the sticks they plan to sell each month.
How do they calculate that?
Pretty straightforward, actually. They take the number of sticks they plan to sell each month and they multiply it by the product cost per unit.
Okay, so for October, they're selling 1,000 sticks, and their product cost per unit is $17.61. So their cost of goods sold for October would be $17,610.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered the production costs in detail, but they can't just magically sell those sticks. There are other expenses involved.
Oh, absolutely. We need to factor in those selling and administrative costs.
All right, so what goes into that budget?
Think about all the costs of selling and marketing those hockey sticks, plus the general admin costs of running the business.
So sales commissions, marketing campaigns,
Yeah.
salaries, rent, utilities, that kind of stuff.
All of that. And those expenses can be either variable, meaning they change based on sales, or fixed, meaning they stay pretty much the same each month.
Got it. Dr. B mentions they have a sales expense budget. It includes both sales commissions and salaries for their sales manager.
The commissions are a classic example of a variable expense. More sales, more commissions.
They pay their salespeople a 10% commission on each stick sold. So for October, with 1,000 sticks projected to be sold at $60 each, that's $60,000 in sales and $6,000 in commissions.
Exactly.
On top of that, they have the fixed cost of the sales manager's salary, which is $2,000 per month. So their total selling expenses for October would be $8,000.
You got it.
Now, administrative expenses, those are usually fixed costs, right?
Typically, yes.
Dr. B says they usually budget a set amount each month for admin expenses.
Based on their past spending and any changes they anticipate.
So things like salaries for office staff, office rent, utilities.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered production costs, selling expenses, admin expenses. Anything else we need to consider before we get to the grand finale? The cash budget.
Ah, yes. Capital expenditures.
Capital expenditures.
Those are investments in things that will last for a long time, things they use to generate revenue.
Like buying new equipment, upgrading facilities.
Exactly.
So investing in growth, not just day-to-day operations.
Precisely.
And those don't directly impact the monthly operating budget, right?
Right, but they're still an important part of the overall financial picture.
Okay. Now, are we ready for the cash budget? The big finale.
I think we are. This is where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, cash flow's king, right?
Absolutely.
If you don't have cash, you can't pay your bills, you can't invest.
Exactly.
So walk me through how they make this cash budget.
Okay, so first they start with their beginning cash balance for the quarter. That comes from their balance sheet.
And for them, that's $20,000 at the start of the quarter.
Right, that's their starting point. Then they need to project their cash receipts for each month. That's all the cash coming into the business.
So cash sales, collections on accounts receivable.
You got it. And for cash sales, it's pretty simple. They take their projected sales for the month and multiply that by the percentage they expect to collect in cash. Dr. B mentions they typically collect about 40% of their sales in cash.
Okay, so for October, with projected sales of $60,000, their cash sales would be $24,000. Now for collections on accounts receivable. That's where the timing can get a little complicated, right?
It can, because they don't collect all of those receivables in the same month the sales are made.
Right, so they have to look at their past collection patterns to figure out when they expect to get paid.
Exactly.
Dr. B says they usually collect 60% of their sales on credit, and those payments come in the following month.
So for October, their collections on accounts receivable are actually based on September sales, which were $42,000.
Okay, so 60% of that is $25,200. That's their collections on accounts receivable for October.
You got it. So their total cash receipts for October would be $49,200.
$24,000 in cash sales plus $25,200 in collections.
Precisely.
Okay, so they've got their cash coming in all figured out, but what about cash going out?
Ah, yes, the cash disbursements. They need to account for all of those cash outflows each month.
Payments for materials, labor, overhead, selling expenses, admin expenses, all of it.
Exactly. And once they've got both their cash receipts and disbursements projected for the month, they can calculate their preliminary cash balance.
And how do they do that?
It's just their beginning cash balance plus cash receipts minus cash disbursements.
So for October, beginning balance is $20,000. Receipts are $49,200. Let's say their total disbursements for the month are $35,000. That gives them a preliminary cash balance of $34,200 for October.
You got it. And they would repeat that calculation for each month, updating the numbers as needed.
So it's like a monthly checkup on their financial health.
Precisely.
Make sure they have enough cash to cover their expenses.
And if they see they're going to be short on cash, that's a warning sign.
They might need to cut costs, increase sales.
Exactly. They have to be proactive.
Well, we've definitely covered a lot of ground here, from the high-level importance of budgets to all the details of actually making one.
We've laid out the basic roadmap. But remember, this isn't just a one-time thing. Budgeting is a dynamic process.
That's where Dr. B's strong opinions come back in.
Exactly, especially his views on those cushions.
We'll have to dive into that more in the next part of our deep dive.
It's a process that keeps going, and that's where Dr. B's strong opinions come in, you know?
Oh yeah, his whole crusade against those cushions. He really thinks building in those extra buffers just leads to wasteful spending.
He does, and it's definitely a perspective worth thinking about. While some flexibility is important, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on those cushions?
That's a good question. I mean, Dr. B makes a good point about being financially disciplined, accountable for every dollar. But the world is full of uncertainty. What about those unexpected expenses? Sudden changes in the market. Wouldn't it be irresponsible to not have some kind of buffer?
You bring up a really valid point. It's a balancing act, trying to plan carefully, but also knowing that things don't always go according to plan.
Exactly. So maybe it's not about cushions being good or bad, but about managing that flexibility responsibly. Instead of just arbitrarily adding extra money, it's about having a plan for those what-if moments.
I like that, a contingency plan.